Hello sociologists, and welcome to our fourth lesson on our case study for the ethnicity topic, Sudanese Australians. Today we're going to look at barriers to social inclusion for Sudanese Australians, and there's quite a few, so we're not going to have an activity today. We're just going to get through a whole heap of material, so let's get stuck in. Okay, our learning goals for today are: you're going to know some barriers to inclusion for Sudanese Australians, and here's a big list of them: racism and discrimination, employment, education, crime, acculturation, which is just a fancy word that means culture shock, the government, and language. Okay. Language barrier. Okay, not much to say about this. Language barriers affects work and study. However, bear in mind that most Sudanese Australians do speak English, although it's not their first language. And what's really important about language being a barrier is that it affects other things. So it's very difficult to get work if you can't speak English very well. It's very difficult to study in another language. It's very difficult to engage with other members of the community who don't share the same ethnicity or language with you if you don't have it. And people are more likely to discriminate against you if you don't speak their language, or if you speak it heavily accented or whatever. So just briefly, here's a reminder. We had a look at this pie chart in an earlier lesson. This shows the first language spoken at home by all Sudanese Australians. That's Sudanese and South Sudanese put together. So you've got Arabic, which is the official language of Sudan, so that's why there's so many of them. Dinka is the main tribal language spoken in South Sudan. Obviously you've got English there as well. Now this is first language spoken by you're generally going to find that younger Sudanese Australians are more likely to speak English better, as they have been educated in it because they've gone to school here in Australia. Okay, the first barrier, and it's a big one: racism and discrimination. So 77% of Sudanese Australians have experienced racism in the last year. That's according to a recent survey. That's a lot. That's 3/4 of people. They're also seen as having deficits or being damaged people. Okay, a lot of original migrants who came from Sudan came here as refugees. Through refugee camps, they have experienced civil war through the numerous civil wars that have happened in Sudan and South Sudan over the last 50 years. And some of those migrants were child soldiers. However, the current youth, which is the ones who you'll often hear being discriminated against, haven't generally experienced these things. They've often been born in refugee camps and came to Australia very young, or having been born in Australia. So they actually haven't experienced life in a refugee camp or experienced civil war or being a child soldier firsthand. Which is not to say that that it hasn't influenced them through interactions that they've had with their parents or whatever. Peter Dutton. Good old Peter Dutton. This was sort of put Sudanese Australians on the map to a certain extent when there was a little bit of the Sudanese crime occurring in Melbourne. In a series of radio interviews, Peter Dutton said people are scared to go out to restaurants of a night time, apparently because of the large numbers of Sudanese gangs going on in Melbourne. Well, that's what he said. That was quite inflammatory and really divided the community, that claim. The gangs rhetoric is just like a manner of speaking, is blanket discrimination. Yeah. So one of the biggest barriers to social inclusion for Sudanese Australians is this belief, perpetuated by certain politicians, like that guy right there, that Sudanese people are all in gangs. Here's a book about the experiences of Sudanese Australians growing up African in Australia. I'd say check it out, but you're probably not going to. But anyway, that's a book about African Australians experiencing discrimination. Okay, another barrier is employment. So there's a high level of unemployment, especially for young males, and this is a truism across history, is that any time that you find a large group of unemployed young men, you're going to have problems. idle hands are the devil's plaything, as someone once said. So unemployment for Sudanese Australians is 5 times the national rate. Now bear in mind, given that there's a crisis going on in Australia in 2020 and unemployment rates are going up for everybody, you can just imagine what that's going to mean for Sudanese Australians. Many have no skilled employment history before migrating. First generation migrants who come to Australia trying to get skilled work here, they don't have experience in it, and so they find it difficult to get employment in skilled areas. Right, so here's a little slide from a report from the government immigration website. Just briefly, on the right hand side, have a look there. That tells you the types of work that Sudan born people do versus the total population. So there's way more Sudanese people do manual labourers and personal service, which is retail, stuff like that. Now, if you have a look on the left-hand side there, you'll see the unemployment rate was a whopping 26.8%, whereas the Australian overall unemployment rate was just 6.9%. This is Sudan-born people, so it's not exactly the same as Sudanese Australians, because remember, there's a lot of Sudanese Australians who were born in Australia. So this is first-generation migrants we're talking about. And you'll notice there that way more Sudan-born people are managers, are in professional jobs, technical. Yeah, they're much more likely to be doing unskilled and semi-skilled work, which pays less, which would explain why there's that huge gap in wealth between Sudanese Australians and other Australians. I think, if you can remember, the average Australian household takes in about $688 a week, but for Sudanese Australians it's about $377, so a massive gap there. Another barrier is education. So racism is a major factor in dropout rates. Yeah, okay, so only 60% of Sudanese Australians finish high school versus 82% of other Australians. And one of the major factors in that dropout rate is the racism that they experience at school. Some Sudanese Australians, probably more older generations, were illiterate, weren't able to read and write when they came to Australia in the first place, so that doesn't help. Remember, all of these barriers to education have flow-on effects for getting jobs and therefore getting income. Yeah, the 3 things are linked. Your education gets you a job, which gets you money, which allows you to improve your education for your kids and so on. So once there's a breakdown in any one of those 3 things in the cycle, you see poverty, unemployment, and low education. This is an interesting point. The education system privileges the dominant culture. The dominant culture in Australia, of course, being white Anglo-Australian culture. If you're not part of that white Anglo-Australian culture, then the education system doesn't privilege you. Yeah, there's all kinds of little examples of things that are kind of assumed that you'd know because you're part of this white Anglo-Australian culture. And if you're not part of that white Anglo-Australian culture, then you are left out of the education system to a degree. Another thing here, Sudanese Australians who do go on to get university degrees, that doesn't turn into work as much as for other Australians. So if you've got a university degree or TAFE qualification, you're much more likely to be employed or have a high-paying job. That doesn't pay off as much for Sudanese Australians because they experience all these other barriers. So even when Sudanese Australians do go and get university degrees, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get work as much as if they were a white Australian or whatever. So here we've already looked at this graph before. This shows you the level of qualifications of people born in Sudan versus the total population, and you'll see there's much more. There's many more Sudan-born people who don't have any qualifications at all, and less who have got degrees or higher. Remember, this is Sudan-born people, okay? So this doesn't necessarily mean all Sudanese Australians, because as mentioned, some Sudanese Australians were born in Australia. But, yeah, less educated in general. Now, crime. Another barrier to social inclusion is either the fact of or the belief that Sudanese Australians are criminals. But if you look at all the groups, Australian-born people, New Zealand-born people, and Sudanese Australians are all overrepresented in crime statistics. Yeah, so so if you look at like there's so and so percentage of the population, they should have the same percentage of crime. Australian-born people, New Zealand-born people, and Sudanese-born people are all overrepresented, so they commit more crimes than they should based on how many people from those birthplaces live here. Okay. In terms of Sudanese Australians, there's a small number of people who are committing a large number of crimes. That's what you see if you delve quite deeply into their crime statistics. It's not a broad range of Sudanese Australians committing a lot of crimes. You've got this small hardcore that are committing heaps of crimes, which pushes the statistics up. They have the highest imprisonment rate of any migrant group in Australia, and Sudanese Australians do currently have the highest crime rate of any migrant group in Victoria. Okay, this is a graph that was in the a data table that was in the Australian newspaper. It's from the Victorian Crime Stats Agency. You can pause this and have a look at this in a bit more detail if you like. The thing that I really want to draw your attention to, though, is this column here. Basically, if the number is above 1, that means they're committing more crimes than you would expect based on their population. If it's below 1, they're committing less crimes than you'd expect based on their population. Okay, so as I was saying, Australians, Sudanese, and New Zealanders are all overrepresented. Yeah, have a look there. They're all numbers above 1. So, for example, Vietnamese people commit less crimes than your average Australian population. Chinese people are less likely to commit serious assaults, and Indian people less likely to commit serious assaults, and so on. These are all the different crime categories, but as you can see there, in pretty much every category, Sudanese people are overrepresented. Yeah, especially aggravated robbery. Yeah, aggravated robbery, aggravated burglary, highly overrepresented. In fact, all of them. Yeah, so there you go. So yes, Sudanese Australians. Remember, from what I've read, it is a small number of people committing a large number of crimes, but it turns up in these crime statistics. There you go. So another barrier is acculturation or culture shock, and I might see if I can get Google to define that word for me. Hey Google, define acculturation.
This is the definition of acculturation. Assimilation to a different culture, typically the dominant one.
There you go. Thank you very much. So, essentially, South Sudanese and Sudanese people, one of the big barriers to them being included in Australian society is culture shock, the big difference between cultures. So the gender roles in traditional Sudanese society and Australian society are quite different, much more of a patriarchy, so men traditionally have much more of a dominant role than you would see in typical Australian culture. There's higher rates of domestic violence amongst Sudanese Australians than there are in other groups. In parenting styles are quite different. Sudanese Australians typically physically discipline their children much more than what you would see in the typical Australian family. And parenting used to be shared amongst the entire community. So remember, traditional Sudanese culture is much more community focused, communal. Australian culture is much more individualistic. So in Australia, you just get parented, you just get raised by your mum and dad, maybe a grandparent or two, whereas in traditional Sudanese culture, you're much more likely to be raised by a wider group of people, including others in your tribe or your village. So all of these things are, going from such a different culture to Australian culture is a barrier. Masculinity, just to go back to this point about patriarchy, the views of masculinity in traditional Sudanese culture are quite different to those in Australia. You could probably argue that Australia is less sexist than many African cultures. I wouldn't want to press that point too hard because I don't have any hard data to prove it, but generally you find that industrialized wealthy countries have less gender bias than more traditional societies do. In terms of youth, there's a real conflict there for youth because young Sudanese Australians are raised within an Australian Western culture and have all of those influences, and yet they've got their parents and their grandparents and their wider community who might be interested in keeping them, wanting them to stick to traditional Sudanese culture. So there's that conflict for the young people, especially with the traditional and then Western Australian. And then there's this whole point about collectivism versus individualism. Most Anglo countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, USA, UK, are quite individualistic, yeah, all about me, me, me. Well, not selfish, but more just, traditional Sudanese culture is more collectivistic, more communal, more about the community rather than about individual rights. Another barrier this is interesting because the government is also an enabler because they do provide a lot of financial and other kinds of support. However, due to the specific migration experiences of Sudanese Australians, the government and authority can also be a barrier. Now, the government is the one that manages Sudanese people's integration into Australian society, and that's a problem because Sudanese Australians are often distrustful of government because they come from a country where their own government is quite corrupt. Back in Sudan, 90% of crime is not dealt with by the police and the justice system, it's dealt with by tribal elders. And so when crimes are committed, they're not reported to the police, and so there's not the traditional attitudes towards police. Yeah, so there's distrust of government due to corruption and memories of corruption of government in Africa. And we've found one survey that suggests that young Sudanese Australians, only about 26% of them trust the Australian police, which is very, very low. It's much lower than what you're going to find in the other Australian groups. Okay, we're going to watch a video called Why It's Hard to Live in Australia as an African. Take it away.
What's your name, brother?
Yeah, my name's Caps.
Caps?
Yeah, man.
Capsicum?
Nah.
I'm kidding, bro. Okay, where you from, Cap?
I'm from Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone?
Here, man.
Born here, so you're born in Australia, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Name, brother?
Mawan.
Mawan?
Yeah.
Do you mow around? No, fucking, no, I'm kidding, bro. I'm kidding. Yeah? Mawan, yeah?
Yeah.
What about you? Where you from?
Sudan.
Sudan. What about you? What's your name?
Janet.
Janet, where you from?
Uganda.
Uganda. What about you?
Winnie.
Windy?
Winnie.
Winnie? Where you from?
South Sudan.
South Sudan. Okay, where you from?
South Africa and Fiji.
South Africa and Fiji?
Yeah.
Okay. What about you, bruv?
My name is Adope.
Dop?
Yep, I'm from Sudan. I was born in Sudan.
You're born here, yeah?
Yeah, I know. I was born in Sudan.
You're born in Sudan.
Kevin.
Where you from? Kevin?
Yeah.
Really?
No.
I'm kidding, I'm joking with you.
Man.
Patrick, where you from?
I'm from Blacktown.
Blacktown. What country? What's nationality, background?
Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone, I like that. Okay. My question is, do you find hard to live in Australia as an African person? Excuse, yeah? How do you find living in Australia as an African person?
Living in Australia, it's safe out here. And I like it. It is what it is.
Well, being born here, you get used to a lot of stuff. So, I mean, it wasn't really hard for me.
Growing up, it was difficult because I was the only dark kid in my class, so I was bullied a lot. But there's a quote that I remember every time I think that it's not difficult, and that's diversity isn't welcome, it's tolerated. So
yeah.
I feel as though our society tolerates diversity rather than welcomes it.
Okay,
Nah.
no?
No, there's some ups and downs, but like
being an African is not really that bad over here. They show much love for us. Acceptance.
Acceptance, yeah.
There are particular groups here that are giving all us Sudanese a bad image. And the Australians just assume we're all one, like we all the same. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like we're all into that crime activity, whatnot, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so that's why, yeah. What about you? Do you feel hard to live in Australia as an African?
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of racism, you know, like people will like belittle you a lot, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Why? Give me a reason, like give me a reason.
because some of them are racist.
Yeah, what else?
Yeah. And you know, I don't know, man. I'm high as fuck.
Not that bad, but it has its moments. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So you feel the both ways. Sometimes you feel good.
Yeah, 50-50.
50-50? What about you, bruv?
Man, Australia's one of the safest countries in the world, bro.
Yeah? What about you, bruv?
Oh yeah, just like Malak said, it goes both ways. There's good and bad to it.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, like what he said, like a lot of people really adore us, I guess. They really are into our culture and they want to get involved in what we do and stuff. So yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, just basically adding on to what they said, like, because we live in a multicultural society, like, I feel very accepted and, like, our culture is appreciated. So, honestly, as an Australian living, as a Sudanese or an African living in Australia, it's actually really great, yeah.
Okay. Like other people,
Yeah?
like people from here,
Yeah?
it's like sometimes I feel like I'm respected. No, I mean, I just do little things to them is like a big matter. So, like, sometimes I feel like, oh, yeah, I feel like I'm not welcome sometimes.
Yeah? Fine. Like, what's the, you know, tell me something that you hate the most, like, to be in Australia. What's the thing that you hate the most in Australia as an African?
I guess it's a stereotype. That's probably the biggest thing for me, the stereotype, as in like, as soon as I see one African like committing a crime, it might like just be like some like stealing, you know, and then all of a sudden all Africans are all thieves, all Africans are all thugs, and like this is the stereotype around Africans. That's probably the biggest thing I hate, because like it's only a small group of people who are doing things, but yet all of us as a whole we get labelled. So that's what I don't like.
You get that, yeah? You get that, yeah? What about you?
Basically the same thing.
Yeah? What about you? Tell me something different.
It's just like when you're on public transport or something, like that one person that will stare at you for long periods of time.
Like, what the fuck you looking, bitch ass?
Yeah, like we're just, you know, regular people trying to go about our day.
Yeah, I like that.
What I hate the most is that the government tend to focus on the wrong things.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Something that you really, really hate about Australia or you don't like about Australia.
That's a hard one, man.
Yeah?
Like probably the racism,
Yeah. What about you?
The hidden racism.
Fuel is very expensive.
The fuel, yeah? It's expensive,
Very
yeah?
expensive, yeah.
Me too, I hate
The lack of opportunities.
Yeah?
There's really nothing here.
Yeah? Yeah, compared to other countries?
Compared to other countries, we really don't have anything.
Okay, I like that. What about you? I'll come back to my brother.
Probably stereotyping. Like, you can go inside a store, and then like everyone's just staring at you, thinking that you're about to steal something when you're not, just trying to buy some.
Yeah,
Then,
so like, are you saying that you don't have the freedom, like that you can go out with your friends or go out as a group and like, you know, just be you?
Yeah. It's even worse in a group, but then we're just gonna go cause trouble. And then, I think everyone is the same. Where it's just like a select few people that just mess it up for everyone.
Yeah.
I just hate stupid questions, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, like me, yeah?
Nah, not like that.
This guy got me, but yeah, keep telling me from.
Nah, but like, you know, don't ask where I'm from, you know what I'm saying?
So you don't like when they ask you like, hey, where are you from?
I don't like the privileges they give us black people.
Yeah?
There is no privilege.
Yeah?
Period.
You gotta get that for yourself, though.
We're gonna get it.
Yeah?
We're gonna get it. I'm gonna get it for us.
Yeah, I like that. What do you like the most in Australia? Something that you like or you love about Australia, like being in Australia?
I like that I know this sounds weird, but I like the fact that there's a lot of nature. Like when I went to visit America, it was just really crowded and I felt like I was suffocated. But here there's just like, it's like open and you can breathe. Yeah.
Okay.
I love the fact that it gives us freedom. Not to be a dumb criminal or any of that, but freedom of education, freedom of speech. And to use all of that stuff in a positive way. You know?
Yeah.
At least we could give ourselves a name, a good reputation somehow.
Probably compared to America, is way better. Free healthcare, and also the government looks after people as well.
Yeah?
Yeah, compared to like other countries.
Hey, what do you like the most that you live in Australia, or something that you brought off that other people from USA, UK, other countries don't have it?
Settling.
What about you?
Settling back.
Hey, no report, no pay.
Hey.
The environment here.
Yeah?
The atmosphere is not that bad. Yeah.
Opportunity for an African person, because you could go into a job, and because you're black, you can probably get the job. I'm not gonna lie.
What do you like about Australian people? The people.
Ooh, I would say that some Australian people can be very welcoming, mostly the millennials. But other than that, the new generation is more welcoming. But with some Australian people and some white people, I still feel like I can't really click with them. So I just hang out with ethnic people.
Okay, everyone's nice, friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like going to the gym.
Yeah.
The safety and like compared to other countries like the earthquakes and all that, we don't like really get those here. So.
You go modeling, just because you're black, you can get the job.
Just like that.
I'm not lying, man.
Yo. Okay, what else? Yeah. Like something.
Opportunities, you know. Yeah, Australia give us a lot of opportunities, you know.
Education.
Yeah. Education is free. Yeah.
Safety.
Safety,
man.
Yeah, I like the sports here. Basketball.
Yeah. So everything's free. That's what
everything's free and it's pretty good.
Yeah. Like the food.
Oh yeah, the food is really nice. Yeah, we have a lot of variety of foods that, you know, like it's just not one like simple food. We have like macas and all that, and also have like
what about Chinese food?
Yeah, we have Asian foods, Hai Thai. Yeah, the Hai Thai. We have all different types of food, you know. So it's great. Like everything's just multicultural here.
Yeah,
it's great.
Culturalism, like.
So you like the multiculturalism they have here?
Yeah, compared to most countries.
Yeah.
They don't really have that, but Australia.
It's very multicultural.
Yeah,
yes?
it's a fair country. You could say that. It's fair to an extent.
Oh, okay.
Bitches. And money.
Hey. Nah, I'm kidding. I'm fucking with you. Okay, tell me more.
There's like a lot of freedom, like with everything in Australia. Like you're allowed to do a lot of things. You know, you have like opportunities all the time coming at you. You have freedom of speech, freedom to do whatever you want, to express culture.
The opportunity, yeah?
Yeah, opportunities, everything, like it's free, you know? You don't feel like confined or anything living in Australia.
Okay, what about you? I got my nigga. Tell me something, brother.
Like you're allowed to travel around Australia, go places, do things that you normally wouldn't do in Sudan, like play basketball or like go elsewhere for university and stuff like that.
Yeah, so like,
we don't have as much gun violence here because, you know, we're not allowed to have guns. So like,
and it's not much crime here, you know?
Yeah, like compared to over there where like they have gangs and all that, over here it's more mellowed out and you can enjoy yourself.
The money is good.
Yeah?
No doubt. But to get the money is hard, you know?
Yeah?
Yeah.
So you like the money, yeah?
Yeah, I like the money. Yeah, the money is good here. You get the money, you help the people back home.
Yeah.
That's what's up, you know?
When you go around, you see people like, especially white people, like when they look at you, do you scare of them?
No, I think it's just like.
Fuck are you looking?
No, it's just like I think when police come around us, like to me, like I get scared because, you know, sometimes like I just feel like even though I'm not doing anything, like they just might approach me and like attack for no reason. So that's how I feel.
I like that. What about you, my brother?
I reckon over here is so much better, like with the policing, like they're more just over here instead of like in America where they'll probably like shoot you if you're like black and not really do anything.
Yeah, here's like a male, like chill, like they approach you in a different way, like calm way.
Like the most you'd get, like if you actually did do something, would be like a pepper spray or something like that. Like, so
it's not that tough.
Yeah, it's not life or death.
Sometimes when you're in public, or like in train station, buses, do you feel like people look at you differently, or like do you feel like a hate energy?
Most definitely. Most definitely.
Okay. Tell me something like, as we live in Australia, tell me something that you feel proud of that you have in Australia, but people from USA or UK or other countries don't have it.
No school shootings. That's something I'm very happy to stop laughing. There's something I'm very proud about. We enforce our laws when it comes to the public safety quite well here, and we have quite good benefits here compared to other countries. And racism in America has just gone like really far, to be honest, and it's not even systematic anymore. It's just out in the open and it's just pushed aside. It's just become normalized in that society. But here it's kind of subtle, but sometimes it's pretty obvious, but it's never as extreme as America.
Damn, you took a lot. I like that.
Being Sudanese in Australia, you know, you can't act the way other people act, you know, you gotta act a certain way. You gotta carry yourself different to others. Like being Sudanese, you can't do what like you see other white people doing on the streets, you know, you just gotta be mature and just chill.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What about you, man?
Yeah, that's exactly. You have to carry yourself a bit different, you know, you can't be you in a certain point. You can't be too loud, you can't be that, because attention, being black already, everybody's focusing on you, you know what I mean? So you really have to learn how to control yourself, try to fit in with the crowd, because you're already standing out.
Yeah.
And with the drama that's happening with like Melbourne and everything, like we have to carry ourselves much different to everyone. Like right now people will see like we're bad, or like young kids, you see them in the streets, they think we're already bad kids, you know what I mean? So we have like a standard we have to put ourselves, you know what I mean?
Yeah, what about you, bro?
Yeah, just like all these guys said, man, there's a lot going on. Everyone has expectations for everyone. You know, you can't really be out here doing anything. You know, you gotta watch everything you gotta do, because everyone's judging you, even if like they don't seem like they're judging you, and everyone already sees you like.
As an African person that lives in Australia, I can tell you that there's a lot of good things that you can do in this country. Please, if you like this video, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and I will see you in the next episode.
Time for another video. It's African gangs in Australia and why South Sudanese should be more concerned. Take it away.
Hi YouTube, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, welcome. I just wanted to quickly discuss this issue of African gangs, which has been circulating on Australian media, and I've seen lately that it's getting its round globally as well. So I think it's becoming quite a serious topic at this point that needs discussion, and you know, I'm glad that it's out there for us to discuss. Maybe we'll find a solution to the problem, and I hope we do find a solution sooner than later. Now, I'm not saying I have all the answers or all the solutions, but I'm really appalled. I'm angry actually, and disappointed in our community. I'm disappointed in the South Sudanese community, to be specific. Even though they're being known in the media as African gangs and such hashtags, I think this issue is more so a South Sudanese problem. And if anything, they should be called South Sudanese gangs. Okay, now the African community is being roped in for no reason. I'm not saying, you know, all African children or all African youth are innocent. They are not saints either, but the issue of the Apex gang, to be specific, is a South Sudanese problem at large. And that's why I think that the South Sudanese community should be more invested in solving the problem, because it's affecting us more than any other African community in Australia. You know, why am I appalled? Why am I angry? I'm angry because of the response that I'm seeing from our community leaders and just our community in general. You know, I'm not seeing a lot of condemnation. What I'm seeing is support and enabling of this behavior. You know, I'm seeing a lot of apologists. You know, I don't understand why anybody would, you know, would support this kind of behavior. If anything, you know, this is the most un-South Sudanese behavior that we know it, you know, that as we know. We didn't grow up, you know, with this kind of, you know, just, you know, theft. You know, theft is one of the things that is really frowned upon in Sudanese society. And you know, a son or daughter of a thief would not marry in his village, his or her village, because, you know, they'll be known as thieves, and nobody would want to marry them or you know, get their kids married off to them. You know, they would be basically shunned by society and would have to move to, you know, faraway villages to start a new life. You know, that's how serious it is. You know, theft is something that is seriously condemned in our community, and it brings shame to one's family. You know, your children will forever be known as children of a thief. And that name does not go away, it remains. And that's how I've always known it, because, you know, I'm fortunate that I got to, I came to this country at an age whereby I was exposed to both cultures. So I do know a bit about South Sudanese culture as much as I do know a bit about the Australian culture. And I know for sure that theft and this kind of behavior that we're seeing with South Sudanese youth is very un-South Sudanese, very, very un-South Sudanese. And for our elders, and this just the community at large, to enable this behavior just goes to show what has really, really been made of our community. You know, I'm blaming a lot of people on this, you know, and, you know, I'm seeing the Labour Party being so involved for some reason. I don't know why they're using the kids as you know, to push their agenda. You know, they're too involved in the community, if in my opinion, and they're enabling these children as well, as much as the community is. They're coming out, they're coming up with all kinds of excuses, or, they're traumatized, they come from war-torn countries, they're having issues integrating into Australian society, or they're being racially profiled, and this is all to do with racism. I mean, if it's racism, then can you please tell me why every time we're seeing a story about an African gang, quote unquote, we're seeing video footage of visible Africans, black people, okay? They may not be all South Sudanese, but I know a South Sudanese when I see one, because I happen to be one. And most of the times I can recognize they're South Sudanese, I just don't know them personally, and so who's making these people? Like, you cannot make it up. You cannot make the footage up. These are real people. They're real Africans, real African youth, real Sudanese youth, robbing jewelry stores, robbing, liquor stores, and just being juvenile delinquents and all kinds of nincompoopery. This is something that we're seeing live. The media cannot make it up. The Australian public cannot make it up. Nobody can make up a real person committing a crime or doing anything. You cannot fake. I mean, I know you can Photoshop people, but come on now, we're seeing real footage of real people committing these crimes, okay? You cannot have any more evidence of this than the video footage that we're seeing and photographs. So for anybody to deny that this is not happening, that's to me is excusing the behavior. It's a form of pardon. And it's also, what you're saying basically to the Australian public is that you support this behavior and that you're endorsing it. Otherwise, why can't we just come out as a community and say, look, we understand that we have a problem. We understand we have a problem and we're working on it. And, that even myself as a South Sudanese, I'm afraid of these people. When I moved away from Melbourne. I'm originally from Melbourne, but every time I visit Melbourne, I'm afraid. Not only am I afraid of my own people, the youth, but I'm afraid of the judgment that I'm getting from the wider community just because I happen to look like them as well. And that's not fair. It's not fair on my daughter. It's not fair. It's not fair on my kids, or it's not fair on other Africans and other South Sudanese for them to just be judged based on the actions of a minority. And I hear that a lot as well. Oh, they're just a minority. Of course they're a minority. And that's why it's a problem, because they're a minority. The population of the Sudanese or the African community should not have this many criminals. It is too small a community to harbor as the number for the numbers to be this high. Well, not this high per se, but it just we just have too much of this happening within the community, and we have to acknowledge that. We have to be honest about that. I know there are repeat offenders. Some of these young kids are becoming now career criminals. They're in and out of jail, and a lot of the times you find that it's the same small group of youth that are repeating crimes over and over again. And it is not, nobody's saying that it's the whole community. That's not true, because it's not true. It is a small percentage of the community, but it is still a big problem because now, with the media attention, not only are there going to be more youth joining these gangs because of the notoriety that comes with it, because of course, what young boy does not want to see themselves on the news and, feeling, that's what's going to happen. You push an agenda for long enough, or, if something is not done about this, and we're going to see more kids actually joining these gangs. And that means it's up to us. It's up to the Sudanese community to do something about it. All we can do is ask the wider community to assist us in resolving the issue. But they're not entitled to helping us solve it. This is our problem. These are our kids. These are our brothers. They're our sons. I would hate to see my brother or my son on the news doing what I'm seeing these kids doing. And these are people who have parents here. Why aren't we blaming the parents? Why aren't we blaming, why aren't we getting to the bottom of the problem instead of coming to defend every other situation? Why don't we try to solve the problem? Clearly, the problem is within the homes. It's within the families. This is a community problem as much as it is a family problem, individual problems within the families, and I know that nobody wants to admit that. Nobody wants to come out and say that there's a cultural issue in our community. I do understand that a lot of the older generation don't, they're struggling to integrate. They're really struggling. They don't know how to parent in this society. Their old school ways of parenting are virtually illegal here. So they don't know what to do with their children. Their children are basically running the households, and there's a lot of dysfunction happening. There's a lot of dysfunction happening in the households, and that's where the problem begins, in my opinion. Now it's gotten to the point where it's left the homes and it's reaching the wider community. It's now become a South Sudanese problem, not just family problem. And we have to do something about it. All I'm saying is that, let us condemn this behavior publicly as a community instead of making excuses and enabling juvenile delinquents. Okay. We need to do something about it. And we need, all we can do at this point is ask the support of our fellow Australians. And, until then, let us work within our communities to solve the problem. Let us start one child at a time, one youth at a time, one family at a time. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I surely, will not condone this behavior. That's what I will not do. This is not the South Sudanese community that I know. This is not South Sudanese behavior. It is totally un-South Sudanese. And I'm ashamed to see that this is what our community is being made out of. The media is, of course, going to sensationalize whatever issue because they're making money. They're corporations. Why would you expect them to do anything less than that? They're having a story put on their plate. The media would not have anything to report if these kids were not out doing anything. They would not be able to make up anything. They're only reporting what they're seeing and sensationalizing it. Of course, we cannot blame the media either because that's what they do. If we want less of this issue to be reported, then we need the numbers to reduce. We need less children, less youth committing crime, and that way we'll have less coverage on the television and on our evening news. That's all. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
Right on, it's time for your reflection activity. I want you to rank these barriers to inclusion. So we've been talking about barriers to social inclusion for Sudanese Australians, what barriers there are to them being included in Australian society. Here's a list of barriers. I want you to rank them, in your opinion, from which one is worst to which one is not so bad. Racism and discrimination, employment, education, crime, culture shock, and what else we got there? Government and language. So there you go. There's 7. I just want you to rank them. So draw a line, 2 arrows, put one that thinks the worst on one end and one you think's not so bad at the other end. Yay. Okay, homework time. It is our weekly practice response. You're going to do an extended response here. So this is a long one. You should spend about 15 minutes writing it, but it's a good idea to do a little plan first. Answer this question. Explain the barriers to social inclusion experienced by Sudanese Australians. And for those of you in my class, make sure that you put that on my OneNote in the shared space. So, how to do an extended response? You have an intro. You should already have this information. This is just to remind you. You have some paragraphs and you use that acronym TREES. Topic sentence, references, evidence, evaluation, and the sociological theory where relevant. And then a conclusion, yeah? But the most important thing is down the bottom there. Answer the question being asked. Look for clues about how to answer the question. We already talked about that. I would recommend that you structure your answer around those 4 parts of the sociological imagination. For those of you that are keen as beans, here's some bonus homework. Read about the demographics of Sudanese migrants in Australia right there, bit.ly/Sudanese 2020. And remember, the full set of notes about this topic that I've taken are all there, bit.ly/Sudanese notes. Check them out sometime. Thank you so much for participating in this lesson. And as I like to say, keep it real.